I'm Adam Shear, and I'm at the University of Pittsburgh. My connection to the Center for Jewish History goes back to 2009, when I was invited to start the first Scholars Working Group that continued for a few years. And then, since then, I served on the Academic Advisory Council for a term and have kept up involvement visiting the center and taking part in programs. In doing research at the center, I became interested in looking to see what kinds of records were in the center that could tell the story about the movement of Jewish books after the early modern period. My particular interest is early Hebrew printed books in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. There's a wonderful collection of this in the Evo collections, and there are a few in some of the other collections. But knowing the incredible wealth of archival materials that the center has from the 19th and 20th century, I began to look for inventories and book catalogs and so on. And one of the interesting things at one point was finding the sales catalogs of the Varman book dealers, which is a bookshop in Jerusalem in the early 20th century. And I had seen some of these in the National Library of Israel in Jerusalem. And between the center, what was in the center and what was in Jerusalem, I was able to almost have a year-by-year look at what their inventories were. So on its own, this is not, this is not the riveting, exciting thing that maybe that most people would think was exciting to have, stored in the wonderful stacks of the center, some 1920s and 30s book dealers' catalogs. I mean, that would probably be dismissed by most people as exceptionally boring. But the way that I was able to sort of put together that material with what was in Jerusalem in another library collection, another great resource, to then be able to trace that out, I found that to be exciting. This was exciting because in the interwar period, in the Mandate period in Jerusalem, to see year by year what used books were coming into the inventory of this book dealer, to see what new Jewish immigrants to Palestine in the Mandate period, in the waves of Aliyah. This was a book dealer that had roots in Germany, and so German immigrants were not only their customers, but the sellers to them of books that they had brought with them. And so to sort of see year by year what was being brought and sort of the buildup of the literary cultural community in the Yishuv during the Mandate period was fascinating to me. What it allowed me to do was also see how much was happening in terms of rarer books that were coming, and also in terms of new publications that were coming out, and the ways in which this still relatively small, relatively new Jewish community was connected with what had been going on in terms of Jewish book history and Jewish book collecting in other major centers in Europe before that. So I'm excited about the continued work that we're doing with the Footprints Project in tracing Jewish books as they move. And for that, we are looking at a huge number of library collections around the world, looking at the early Hebrew printed books and looking at ownership marks, censorship, other indications of who was using this book, how it got from a printing house in Venice in the 16th century into the collection in the 21st century. I'm also doing my own research on 16th century Hebrew books and writing a book about how printers, editors, and book people of the 16th century who were involved with Jewish books were taking medieval Jewish texts and transforming them in the age of print. And that's been a long-term project that I've been working on. And what's exciting about that is I don't go and look at one copy of a book. I look at multiple copies to see how it's being used. I don't just look at the text, but I also look at the title pages, the introductions, whatever can tell me about this as an object that went from a print shop into people's hands and not just a text to be read. So this is the kind of thing that is animating my work now, putting together a sort of summary project on the nature of the Jewish book, which I hope I will be able to publish as a short extended essay, short book on a kind of introduction to the field of the Jewish book. And of course, that one is very dear to me and very dear to my connection with the center because of the working group on the Jewish book, which I wouldn't be able to really have knowledge in this field if I hadn't been able to bring together lots of people for that. I have a long-term side project, which I'm going to share, which I have not shared often publicly, but there is a connection to the center because of the collections in American Jewish culture, which is I'm deeply interested in mystery novels, and I'm deeply interested in Jewish mystery novels and rabbi detectives, going back to the Harry Kemmelman books from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and how they reflected American Jewish culture at the time. And so one of the things I'm hoping to do post-pandemic, back into the building at the center, is to use the incredible collections of late 20th century Americana to see how these books were being received, who was reading these rabbi detective books, what were the book reviews like, and so on. And so that's it's a book history project, but of a very different sort. But I'm excited that when I can get back into the center, that's something I will be looking at in the collections. I've come out as a mystery lover.